They were the ones who would decide what I could grow on my land, how I could manage my crops, and even the types of structures I could build. A barn or a storage shed could suddenly be deemed unsightly or non-compliant, subject to heavy fines. I felt like David facing Goliath. The HOA had lawyers, money, and influence. They had teams of people who worked on these types of cases every day. I, on the other hand, was just a farmer, someone who knew how to grow things, not someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of corporate bureaucracy. But that didn't matter to me. I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let them trample over everything my family had built. Determined to protect what was rightfully mine, I sought help. I contacted a local attorney, someone who had experience with land disputes and zoning laws. The lawyer listened carefully, then gave me the hard truth. The HOA had likely covered its tracks well. They had probably ensured that the bylaws were legally sound, with just enough loopholes and gray areas to make it difficult for any individual to challenge them. But there was still hope. We could fight it in court, but it would be a long and expensive battle. I wasn't scared by the prospect of a fight. I was angry. This was more than just a legal issue. It was a fight for everything my family had worked for. It was a fight for independence, for the right to live life on my own terms. I didn't want to become another victim of the system, another story of a small property owner swallowed up by powerful institutions with no respect for history or individual rights. The next few months were a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and community hearings. I was constantly playing catch-up, trying to keep pace with the HOA's moves. They sent inspectors to my farm, trying to find reasons to fine me, inspecting every corner of the property for violations. They sent threatening letters, each one more demanding than the last, warning that my time to comply was running out. But I refused to give in. I started attending town meetings, rallying support from my neighbors, many of whom were also beginning to feel the pressure of the HOA's encroachment. Slowly but surely, a coalition of concerned landowners began to form. We weren't alone in this fight, and that gave me strength. The more people who stood up, the harder it would be for the HOA to bully us into submission. I didn't know how this would end, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them take my farm without a fight. They could try to take control, they could throw all their legal weight at me, but I had something they didn't, a deep, unshakable connection to the land that I was willing to fight for no matter the cost. This wasn't just about property rights, it was about preserving a way of life. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I decided to fight fire with fire. If the HOA was using legal loopholes to claim my land, I would find a way to shut them down. I wasn't going to let them take my farm through legal maneuvering, so I turned the tables. I began researching everything I could about HOAs, their regulations, their licenses, and their legal limits. I needed to understand how they operated and, more importantly, where their weaknesses were. As I delved into the details, I started to uncover disturbing information. It wasn't long before I discovered something shocking. The HOA's license to operate was up for renewal, and it wasn't as ironclad as they thought. That was the key. If I could expose the cracks in their foundation, if I could find a way to challenge their very legitimacy, maybe I could turn the tide in my favor. I spent countless hours going through public records, attending local meetings, and even contacting former residents who had dealt with the HOA in the past. That's when I stumbled upon a series of documents that sent a chill down my spine. The HOA's license had been granted under questionable circumstances. There were missing documents and signed forms, and even allegations of bribery involving local officials. It was clear that the HOA had been playing fast and loose with the law from the very beginning. But I didn't stop there. I dug deeper. I spoke to several other property owners in the area who had been bullied by the HOA over the years. Most of them were afraid to speak out, fearing retaliation or financial ruin if they went public. But I wasn't afraid. I knew that if I could rally enough people with similar stories, the HOA's underhanded tactics could be exposed for all to see. I took careful notes, gathered statements, and started building a case against them. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the HOA's actions were not just unethical, they were illegal. I also started to notice patterns in the HOA's behavior. They had been intimidating property owners for years, using their legal power to control zoning, property taxes, and even personal decisions like what people could build on their own land. There was no room for dissent. If you didn't comply, you were punished, sometimes with fines, other times with legal threats that could bankrupt you. I had heard of some families being forced to sell their properties under duress, and some people had simply given up fighting because they didn't have the resources to go against such a powerful entity. The more I uncovered, the more certain I became that this fight was bigger than just my farm. The HOA wasn't just an annoyance. They were a corrupt organization exploiting the law to serve their own interests. And I wasn't going to stand by while they trampled on the rights of hardworking landowners. With all the evidence in hand, I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in property rights. I needed someone who knew how to navigate the complexities of property law, and more importantly, someone who could help me expose the HOA's shady practices. The lawyer reviewed the documents, listened to my findings, and agreed that we had a strong case. Together, we crafted a plan. Our first move was to challenge the HOA's license renewal, arguing that it had been granted under false pretenses and with numerous legal violations. We filed a petition with the local government calling for a full investigation into the HOA's practices. It was a risky move, but it was our best shot at taking them down. But we didn't stop there. We also began reaching out to other property owners who had been affected by the HOA's bullying tactics. Slowly but surely, more and more people came forward, willing to share their stories and provide evidence of the HOA's misconduct. It felt like a small but powerful rebellion was starting to form, a collective voice that couldn't be ignored. As the weeks passed, the pressure began to build. The HOA had never faced this kind of resistance before, and their usual tactics of intimidation and threats started to lose their power. The more we exposed, the more they realized that their grip on the community was slipping. For the first time, I felt like we had a real chance to win. But I knew the battle wasn't over yet. The HOA would fight back with everything they had. They had the resources, the connections, and the legal teams to make it difficult. But I also had something they didn't, the truth. And as long as I had that on my side, I knew I couldn't lose. This fight was about more than just my land. It was about standing up for what was right, about fighting back against corruption and greed. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. And with each new piece of evidence, I felt more confident that we would bring the HOA to its knees. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. After filing a formal complaint with the state licensing board, I thought I would be able to sit back and wait for a response, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. The HOA fought back hard, accusing me of being a troublemaker and even suggesting that I was simply looking for attention. They tried to discredit my claims, painting me as an irrational landowner who was too stubborn to accept the changes in the community. But I didn't let their intimidation tactics stop me. I knew what I had uncovered, and I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't alone, though. I reached out to the other property owners who had been affected by the HOA's overreach. To my surprise, many were eager to join the fight, even if they had been too afraid to speak up until now. Together, we formed a coalition, a united front against the tyranny of the HOA. We pooled our resources and shared our stories with the local media. Each new voice added fuel to the fire, and the news coverage began to take on a life of its own. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering more details about the HOA's shady practices and the extent of their manipulation. Public pressure mounted on the licensing board, and for the first time, I could see that we were gaining ground. The final showdown came in the form of a public hearing that was scheduled to discuss the HOA's license renewal. The room was packed with HOA members, property owners, and reporters eager to witness the proceedings. Tension hung in the air as the hearings began, and my heart pounded in my chest. I had never been in a room like this before, filled with so much intensity. But I wasn't intimidated. I knew what I had to do.